lighting really has its intended effect when we Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. My name is Danielle Knapp. I'm the McCosh Curator here at the JSMA, and I'm so pleased that you're here for our annual David and Ann McCosh Memorial Visiting Lecturer Program. This is an annual series engaging topics in Pacific Northwest art history and conversation, and it's a wonderful opportunity for us to bring scholars and curators and artists for us to learn from here at the JSMA as we think about the arts of our region. I'd like to share a special welcome if there are members of Native and Indigenous communities and honored elders here. Thank you so much for joining us for Rebecca's talk today. And also a welcome to members of our McCosh Advisory Committee who have joined us. The work that I do here wouldn't be possible without your support. So working with this university's holdings of David McCosh's paintings, works by other Northwest artists in this museum's collection, I spend a lot of time looking at and considering how artists respond to our region, how they represent our region in their artwork, and what kind of inspiration the region provides for their art making. And none of this would be possible without acknowledging and understanding the long history of the region. In the Willamette Valley, we being located on Kalapuya Illahee, the traditional indigenous homelands of the Kalapuya people, understanding that because of treaties with the US government in the 1850s, the Kalapuya were removed forcibly from their homelands and moved to the coast reservations of Western Oregon. And today their descendants are primarily citizens of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians of Oregon, and continue to make important contributions to the University of Oregon, to our community, to our state now known as Oregon, and beyond. We also express our respect for all the federally recognized tribal nations of Oregon, the Burns Paiute tribe, the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon, the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians of Oregon, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, the Coquel Indian Tribe, the Cow Creek Band of the Umpqua Tribe of Indians, and the Klamath Tribes. And we respect our thanks and respect to all other displaced indigenous people who now call the land known as Oregon their home as well. Here at JSMA, we are committed to seeking meaningful partnerships and collaborations with members of Native and Indigenous communities and honoring the artwork through exhibition and study and sharing here at our museum. And I'm so pleased that our exhibition, Our Shared Breath, Creativity and Community, which is the Common Seeing exhibition organized by the JSMA in response to a second year of programming around the Common Reading book, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, has been extended to be on view through October 22nd. So we've got 2 extra months with that show, so you can take a look at that exhibition if you haven't seen it yet after Rebecca's talk. We also just were able to acquire the painting by Navajo artist Melanie Yazzie that's in that show. So that was such a recent happy update that I haven't even updated the label on the wall yet, but we were able to buy that work from Melanie in her gallery, the first painting by a Navajo artist in our collection, and the first work by Melanie Yazzie in this collection. And another of the artists that's in that show, Native Hawaiian artist Lahua Kea, will be here in July for an artist talk. So our esteemed lecturer today is Dr. Rebecca Dobkins. She has been professor of anthropology and the curator of Native American and Indigenous art at the Hallie Ford Museum of Art for quite some time, but is now retiring. And so we're so honored that she is taking on one more event in a very busy year and speaking with us today. She's worked closely with Crow's Shadow Institute of the Arts for over 20 years. Her most recent publication that she'll tell us about, and an opportunity to get your hands on a copy of the book with some wonderful postcards promoting a discount, was a collaboration with all 9 tribes in Oregon, a wonderful, much-needed publication honoring everything that she'll share with us. And I have known Rebecca for most of my curatorial career and have benefited so much from what you've shared, your generosity of time and knowledge, your support, and so I appreciate that so much. And really an honor to be able to invite her here under the auspices of our McCosh Lecture Series. So there'll be time for some questions at the end too, so thank you so much for joining us today, and please help me welcome Rebecca.
Thank you, and thank you, Danielle. I want to first say that I'm just really honored by this invitation and was surprised, happily surprised, when I heard from Danielle And I want to say how much respect I have for Danielle, and for the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art and all that it accomplishes and has accomplished. Danielle and I first got to know each other when she was working on the Rick Bartow show a few years ago. Someone with whom I worked also as a curator brand new to Oregon. I'm also really thankful and happy that University of Oregon chose to have Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, as its common reading, and I do urge you to go see the Shared Breath, the Common Seeing exhibition upstairs. Just got a chance to see that. And I'm really indebted to colleagues in Indigenous studies here, those who teach and those who learn, students and Native students and staff at University of Oregon who have long been in the forefront of advocating for Indigenous presence in higher education in Oregon. It was really exciting. I got here early and I walked around campus and I hadn't been here in a while, and so seeing again the flags of the 9 tribes is really important to me, and those of you who spend a lot of time on this campus may no longer be seeing it, but I see that as a real affirmation of tribal sovereignty, so kudos to you. So today, I want to talk in a way that I hope will support these efforts that I just referenced, and I hope that you are going to see some ways in which the work that I'll be discussing resonates with Robin Kimmerer's emphasis on the reciprocal relationships between people and nature. I also want to acknowledge my understanding that the McCosh Memorial Lecture Series is intended to, in the language I got, engage the community in discussion about trends, theories, and creative practices that shape the artistic culture of our region, kind of like Danielle was saying. And conventionally, I think, the selected lectures have focused on fine arts. But today, I'm going to be discussing what I call contemporary customary arts of Indigenous Oregon. And I hope that we'll have some conversation afterwards in which you maybe see some connections that I have yet to see. I mean, there are many, but I always love seeing what audiences see in the things that we discuss together. So I first want to step back and provide a little context for how I've come to learn about the work that I'm going to be discussing. The book, The Art of Ceremony, that Danielle referenced, and a copy is here, and I do have postcards for it. This is mine, you can't have it, but I do have postcards that will give you a nice 30% off, courtesy of the University of Washington Press. The book itself represents the efforts of many people, really hundreds of people, artists and knowledge keepers over many, many years. The project began as an exhibition way back in 2008 at the Hallie Museum of Art in Salem that was supported by the National Endowment for the Arts and the Oregon Cultural Trust. It featured historic and contemporary regalia chosen by members of the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon. The exhibit went on to travel to 3 other venues, the Museum at Warm Springs, the Tomasalik Cultural Institute at Umatilla, and then finally the Oregon Historical Society in Portland. And those of us involved in the project wanted to see it have a life beyond the museum walls. And this was in part because the last time there'd been any major single publication about the all 9 tribes of Oregon that was sort of oriented to the public was way back in the late 80s with the first Oregonians. So it's been really over 30 years since there's been a publication that focused on all 9 tribes of Oregon, which is shocking when you think about it. So the eventually, as a group, the tribal collaborators and I decided that I would pursue writing a book that would result from a series of ongoing conversations amongst us. And all of the writing and the photographs in the book, and there are about 130 photographs, I think, were reviewed by my tribal collaborators, and the final product is a result of many dialogues over many years. There's no shortcut to work like this. So it's not a surprise I got this out and now I'm retiring because I need some rest. Anyway, the conversations for the book understandably took a turn away from an exhibition's inescapable focus on objects. And today, I'm going to be attending to some objects and sharing some objects with you, but I'm going to be paying as much attention to the work of renewal that these objects represent, and I hope to make some key points. As my title suggests, I'm going to emphasize how the concept of sovereignty is woven into the art forms I'll be discussing. While this is not a legal argument, I am arguing that it is not possible to understand Indigenous customary art practice without having an appreciation and a respect for tribal sovereignty, as well as the sovereignty, the right to exist of other than human beings, flora, fauna, and the elements. Then, drawing on the insights of Indigenous thinkers, I want to emphasize the inseparable relationship between respect, rights, and responsibilities in terms of this people-land creation dynamic. I've come to understand, at least in my beginner's way, that this interrelationship is central to the practice of making things beautifully in Indigenous Oregon. I hope you'll come away with a deepened appreciation of Indigenous customary arts, but also for the very land that we live in, kind of getting back to what Danielle was referring to. In doing this, I'm responding to Kimmer's call for us to be better equipped to meet the responsibilities we have toward the more than human world. Finally, I'm going to explore these themes by making reference to three specific conversations held with the members of the Burn Paiutes tribe, with the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, and the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. I'll be talking about some specific artworks from each that illuminate the themes above, and I want to note that I have chosen not to clutter up my slides with labels. And I do this with a bit of an ethical dilemma, because I do always like to identify artists, and in the book, everything is identified. But today, my goal is for you to just look and feel a little bit and to take some of this in. And so I can provide you identifications for everything if you want to email me, or most of the information is in the book. So to start with this, and I won't always be stopping to identify everything, but I'll start with this. The work you're seeing here on your left is a detail part of a dance skirt by Robert Kenta of the Siletz tribe. And on the right is a dentalium cap made by Sue Perry Olson of Coos, Laura Umpqua, and Sayusla. And I chose these two for a variety of reasons. One, they're stunning. The images are stunning and the work is stunning. But I also chose the detail shots because what we did in the book, as well as in the exhibition, is to try to emphasize the remarkable beauty of the work and get away from an ethnographic gaze. That doesn't mean that we don't appreciate the work in full, but we felt, and tribal collaborators agreed, that there was something very important about this aesthetic of beauty. So I want to begin now into the heart of the talk with the concept of sovereignty. But I'm first going to talk about a conversation that was convened in 2014 when the book the book making process got launched. And one of the people who was there was Bobby Connor, Roberta Bobby Connor, who is director of the Tomasalik Cultural Institute at the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and someone I consider one of the, not just indigenous intellectual luminaries, but one of the intellectual luminaries in my life, certainly. And the conversation was focused on how the research and how the conversations were going to unfold. And if you've ever been with Bobby, she's a remarkable speaker, and she launched into explaining what the art of ceremony meant to her. And this is what she said. Everything emanates from our relationship with the earth, as a way of explaining what the art of ceremony means. It means doing things beautifully and in a beautiful manner. She went on to explain that making ceremony and its associated regalia involves a life being given or shared, whether that was of a plant, whether it's even for firewood, for fibers for medicinal use, or animal for hides or fur, for shells, for feather, for earth, rocks for the sweat lodge, or soil at the foundation of the dance house, or water, which is always implied or present. Connor emphasized, it's out of respect for the life that you've taken that you should make it well. This interrelationship of respect and the making of beauty underpins the indigenous customary art practices that we'll be talking about, and we'll keep returning to this notion of this link between respect and the making of beauty. It was interesting to me at the time in 2008 that the Umatilla choice, the Tomasalik choice for the art of ceremony, and then later for the book, was the sweat lodge. Because you may know, if you've ever been to, say, Pendleton Roundup, or you've been out to Tomasalik or Warm Springs or other places, you know that the plateau tribes are known for their spectacular beadwork, right? But Bobby and other members of the Tomasalik staff emphasized that what they wanted to do was to talk about to them what was the core of ceremony. And that really was the sweat and the presence of water and fire. And so they, among other elements, was this assemblage that they put into the exhibition that features, its big feature, the big beautiful thing here, are the round river rocks harvested from Mount Hood. And so to me, this is as elegant and as beautiful as any contemporary art installation, but is really representing with a tule mat at the bottom and antlers for tongs, and representing the presence of water with the cup there at the left, representing the sweat lodge. So the practice of doing things beautifully, in Bobby's words, whether regalia, baskets, clothing, or ceremony itself, requires ongoing access to customary knowledge. That knowledge, in turn, is based in tribal homelands and all their members, the human community, however dispersed, and the more than human community of plants, animals, and elements. To protect as well as nurture this knowledge, tribes exercise their sovereign rights related to the lands they ceded during the treaty-making era of the 1800s. It's worth taking a moment to reflect on what sovereignty means. At its most fundamental level, at least in Western thought, sovereignty is the inherent authority of a nation to self-govern. The arrival of European colonizers compromised, if not, and attacked the sovereignty of indigenous nations, but US federal law does continue to recognize tribal sovereignty in treaties, executive orders, court decisions, regulations, and so forth, although of course it also limits its exercise. Tribes consistently push against these limits by finding ways their sovereignty can be exercised for the purpose of protecting and tending ancestral lands that have been ceded. And we'll see later on what that has to do with art making. So making things beautifully requires intimate knowledge of these lands and their resources, their plant and animal beings, and the life cycles and needs of those beings. An artist must have a relationship in community over generations present and past. The work of another scholar, Hupa scholar, Kutka Baldi, who's a professor of Native Studies at Cal Poly Humboldt, which I didn't realize until recently, Humboldt State has become Cal Poly, has been really helpful to me in thinking about this. She uses the term biocultural sovereignty to refer to tribal rights to govern the stewardship and future of natural resources that are integral to cultural self-determination. And in an essay called Why We Gather, she makes this clear link between the tending and harvesting of natural resources and the rights of cultural self-determination. So she says, we gather not only because it is our right, but because it is our responsibility. A responsibility we have built through cultural and spiritual interaction with the land, and a responsibility that we must continue in order to maintain the biocultural sovereignty of our indigenous spaces. And indeed, she wrote this as part of, she was referring specifically to the work of basket weavers in gathering and harvest, basket weavers in regalia making, and it has been indigenous weavers, both in California and Oregon and beyond, who have been at the forefront of exercising these gathering rights, which have sometimes been reinforced with formal agreements, say between a tribe and the Forest Service, regarding habitat protection for plant species like bear grass. This is a maple bark skirt in the making by members of the Coquel tribe. But Baldi here is referring to the informal, ongoing practice of tending and harvesting traditional resources as an exercise of tribal sovereignty. And she makes the point that the land and its beings have the right to exist, and that indigenous tending, stewarding, and gathering reinforce that right by nearly most of the time making the habitats healthier, addressing things like overgrowth and clearing, doing traditional burning, and all the kinds of practices that weavers and gatherers would use. So I began above with the notion from Bobby Connor of making things beautifully out of respect for the lives taken or gathered, and followed it with this concept that the rights of sovereignty are accompanied by responsibilities. This is that inseparable relationship between respect, rights, and responsibilities that I introduced above. And to explore this interrelationship further, I now want to turn to the conversations in the three various places I mentioned before. Before I go on, this is a detail of a bridal veil from Warm Springs that was in the family of Elder Adeline Miller for many years, that was then gifted to the museum at Warm Spring, and it's really stunning work. Those are dentalium shells. So we're first going to go to the Burns Paiute tribe and homelands. And there I had the incredible fortune to spend time with Diane Tiemann, who did graduate work here studying anthropology and archaeology, and became an archaeologist and cultural resources director for the tribe, and then now is tribal council chair. And in our conversation about what the Burns Paiute chapter would be for the book, Diane centered the importance of understanding Northern Paiute people's relationship with their land as familial. She explained that a complex cosmology of the Paiute has immense implications for understanding the ceremonial as well as everyday objects that Northern Paiute people have crafted from and within the landscape. By a familial relationship, she means that the people understand themselves as related to the animals and plants who share the landscape as well as the land itself. She has succinctly written, "The people are the land, and the land is the people." the acts and events that occur on the landscape become part of that land and part of the people who continue to dwell on that land, so that history, as we might understand it, is always alive in the present. Thus, cultural objects made or touched by ancestors provide living connections between present and past, and can even collapse the difference between those realms of past and present. Of course, this means that protecting these spaces is vital to community well-being, and we don't have time to go into it now, but those of us who have been around a little while will remember the occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge was at the heart of Paiute homelands and the disruption that brought to that community. So with these concepts in mind of the familial relationship between people and creation and people and the land, we're going to turn to the work of one of the most influential weavers in recent decades at Burns Paiute, Minerva Susi, who passed far too early in 2012. But in her lifetime, Minerva also served as tribal chair, and you're going to see a theme here that many of the people I'm going to talk about are tremendous artists and they're tremendous leaders of their people, elected leaders of their people, which I often thought that if we could elect artists as president and senators, it would be fabulous. It would just be fabulous. Anyway, I could go on about that, but maybe Q&A. She also worked for the Bureau of Land Management, so she had to put up with government bureaucracy as well. And at her home that she shared with her husband, Jim Susi, on the reservation, she had a garden she called her weaving garden, as it contained many of the plants that she would need for her weaving, just to supplement those that she could gather on ancestral lands, but just so that she always had her stock. Minerva wove burden or baskets of willow, as she is here, duck decoys of tule reed, and most significantly, perhaps, at least for this conversation, the hupe or cradle board of willow sticks and deer hide. And these are decorated, so the sticks are made of willow, and you can see through the opening there, the willow there, and the willow shade, and then it's deer hide. Usually Minerva would tan deer hide that were caught by some male, hunted by some male relative of hers. And the detail on this work is, again, to be really appreciated. It's surrounding the child, the new child, in beauty, and really, literally, bringing these relationships between people, the knowledge received through generations about not just making the cradle board, but harvesting the willow, processing the willow, where the willow grows, what the deer's habits are, and so forth. And then surrounding the child in beauty and enabling that child to become part of the activities of the family in a literally secured way. And so it's very interesting to me, and we'll see some other evidence of this, that cradle board making has really seen a resurgence in the last 30 years all across tribal communities. And materials and forms gather, but the purposes are similar. And the cradle board provides a living connection between the past and the present, and in literally shaping the person, the baby, both their physical comfort and security, but also how they can be part of activities also creates a new future. The other, before we sort of leave the Burns Paiute, I also want to mention another important artist and maker of cradle boards at Burns Paiute, and that's Rena Beers, who passed just a few years ago at almost 100 years old. And I'm really grateful to University of Oregon's Folklife Network for sharing these photos of Rena's work. She also was someone who passed on what she did to many other tribal members, and made I guess, countless baby boards over her life span. So turning then from Burns Paiute and this idea of familial land-people relationships, I want to talk now about Siletz and about the dance house practices of Nadosh, of the feather dance. The Siletz are a confederation of many tribes, 36, that were forcibly removed in the mid-1800s from locations all across Southern Oregon and the Willamette Valley and the coast. It is also one of the many Western Oregon tribes that were terminated in the 1950s. That if you haven't heard that term before, that's referring to that was the term that the federal government used when it dissolved tribal legal status. This did not mean the inherent sovereignty of these tribes were lost, and in fact, all of these tribes continued their being as nations, but it wasn't until 1977 that the Siletz won their right to federal restoration again, and then the other tribes followed not long after. But that still has really only been about 40 years. And I just want to, as I get older, 40 years seems shorter and shorter amount of time. So it hasn't been very long. The Siletz did not regain their once expansive coast reservation, but they did begin this process of nation building and land and culture reclamation. And the dance house was really central among these efforts. And this one at Siletz was built in 1996. And others followed at Coquel, at Kuzlor, Kwasayusla, at Grand Ronde. And these dance houses, I think, are important to know about because they cradle the growth of community ceremonial practice, and in a sense, having ceremony in them, in turn, really accelerates the need for regalia making, which in turn accelerates the passing on of those talents and skills. And so nearly 30 years later, entire generations have grown up within their walls. This photo was taken at a summer solstice Nadosh. So the Nadosh is practiced by the Siletz, by the Coquel, by the Tolwa of Northwest California. It's held at summer and winter solstice times. And I have been really fortunate for now almost 30 years to know the dance maker family at Siletz, Bud and Cheryl Lane, and their children, Alyssa and Buddy. And along with Robert Kenta of, well, I'll go ahead and show you that, of Siletz, they've explained the Nadosh to me as a world renewal ceremony, understood to fix or repair the world, to remind people to give thanks to the Creator for the creation, and to carry out the human responsibility for tending to the well-being of the earth. The regalia worn in the Nadosh manifest these relations that people have with creation. And one way of thinking about regalia is to start with the resources that constitute them, which are offerings of the forest, of the ocean, of rivers. And this photograph is of the day after the Nadosh is over. It usually goes for 3 nights. And all of these were spread out on the back of Bud Lane's deck, drying in the sun. And again, I'm not going to go through what all of these things are, but I have seen Peter Hatch of the Siletz tribe give an amazing presentation where he has a diagram of regalia, of men's and women's regalia, and then all of these little arrows out to all of the species that are connected to them and to the ecosystems that they are collected from. So there's obviously the ocean, there's the woods, but for the buckskin, there's lots and lots of feathers, there's pine nuts, you know, just on and on and on. And so the dance is both giving thanks for this creation, but the regalia itself is, of course, is that creation. And so there's a really marvelous celebration and beauty in this work. So for the original exhibition, The Art of Ceremony, I asked every tribal curator to select a single object that would be considered a signature object for the little short publication we planned at that time. And Bud Lane, without any hesitation, said that he wanted to focus on women's dance caps, or what are called in Siletz Dene zitrat. This is one example, a cap that Bud made. This is Bud's wife, Cheryl, on the right with her cap on, and then his granddaughter, who was then about 4, I think, at the Art of Ceremony public events in her little cap. And this girl now is 16, and I think she's taller than me. And so it's marvelous to see. And Bud has made her caps for each of her, of her sizes, and it's really quite marvelous. And so let me quote Bud. And I'm going to say a little more than what you see up here, but I want you to have his words as I read them. The Siletz zitrat is one of the most, as one of the most instantly recognizable ceremonial items that our women wear, is a very strong representation of our people. It represents to us our covenant with the Creator from which the new generations come. In the feather dance, our women and girls represent the promise of the Creator that if we obey his laws, he will send us the new generations. In our dance, in the dance, our women and girls wear a zitrat. Even when a family doesn't have a girl or woman to dance their caps, they are loaned to others for the dance. This loan of a family treasure is viewed by our people as a gesture of concern for the community as a whole, so that the dances go well. Our people making and proudly wearing ceremonial caps, carrying our children and grandchildren in our baby baskets, wearing bark capes and dresses, using traditional mats, and cooking and eating from baskets is preserving the very core of our collective tribal existence. It is our responsibility to make sure that we teach in turn what we have been taught, and always to give thanks for what the Creator has provided us. In this way, we continue to become closer and stronger as a people and community. And this is a shelf with dance caps ready to be danced for ceremony in the dressing room behind the dance house. And this is just a few. There's like, I don't know, probably 40 or 50 now, I think, that Bud has made just himself. A key message of the NADOSH is that the human community has a responsibility to create conditions for resources to thrive by caring for and enhancing the lives of plants and animals, fish and fowl. And this is not merely a worldview. This is not just a nice way of thinking about things, but it's a matter of tribal law and policy. And Siletz, as all tribal governments in Oregon do, works systematically with state and federal natural resources agencies to advocate for the well-being and protection of ancestral lands that are now under jurisdiction of those agencies. And this is a stand of bear grass. You've seen bear grass if you've gotten a floral arrangement anytime in the last 10 years. Okay, it's that sharp stuff. This is what it looks like in bloom. And this is another plant that's really important, maidenhair fern. And if you see the black stems of maidenhair fern, I happen to have maidenhair fern in my garden, but the black stems are very waxy, and they're just marvelous. And so on this cap, the white is bear grass, okay? That's all overlaid. It's a hazel form, and then the bear grass is what's overlaid the white, because that bear grass has been processed and bleached by the sun and shaped consistently. And then that darker sort of black-brown is Woodwardia fern. So think of how much you have to gather and process to make a cap like this. The little yellow is a porcupine quill that has been flattened by teeth and dyed with Oregon grape flower. You know, those really yellow flowers. So, you know, this is an embodiment of American masterpieces. That was the original grant that we had. That was an American masterpieces grant, but not only the work itself, but the sort of masterwork of the habitat that we live in. And so one of the ways that Siletz makes sure that this happens is they and many other tribes have worked with, well, I'm going to say worked with, but I'm also going to say pressured and advocated and organized for decades to get federal land management agencies to help them co-manage resource areas. And so this is a picture from a long time ago. And those of you who knew Aggie Pilgrim, she's over there in the left with a cap on. But this is at the signing of a memorandum of understanding that was now quite some time ago, I think in the early 90s, that is an agreement that Siletz can work with the Willamette National Forest to protect and enhance bear grass habitat, as well as that for traditional foods like camas and huckleberries. Okay, the last one then, the last community then, that we will be taking a look at is Warm Springs. And this is the tule plant. And you also have seen tule everywhere in Oregon. And it is a remarkable plant. It may seem very humble, but it is a remarkable plant. The Warm Springs Reservation also is a tribal confederation. The Wasco, who are Chinookan-speaking people of the Lower Columbia, the Warm Springs, who are Columbia River Sahaptin-speaking people, and then the Northern Paiute, many of whom were removed really against their will to the Warm Springs Reservation. So Warm Springs is also different tribal groups. And in, for the chapter, for the Art of Ceremony chapter, the decision at Warm Springs was to focus on tule and on weddings, and we'll see the connection in just a little bit. But this is a quote from Bridget McConville, who's a salmon fisher, an artist, a beadworker, and tribal council member. Bud Lane is vice chair of his tribe. And Bridget was explaining, you said this phrase when she was explaining how objects made from tule appear throughout the life cycle of human beings. And in a sense, she was also referring to its widespread appearance in the landscape. Tule is also known in English as bulrush, and it's a member of the sedge family. It's native to the western US, and it's ubiquitous in the Columbia Plateau, as well as the Cascades Range. It's in wet, marshy areas and swamps and shorelines and roadside ditches. It has really remarkable insulating and cushioning qualities. And I know you can't really see this, but this is Rosie Johnson cutting some tule, and she's broken it open so you can see it's spongy interior. And when it's dried, it provides great insulation. The stems will absorb moisture in the rain or in the winter, and if they're made into a mat, they'll swell, so the links are tight, and then in the summer when it's hot, they'll open up so that there's more air circulation. And the tule mats are used for a lot of different things, very large mats for tule mat lodges that are, again, found throughout the plateau. They're so iconic in the plateau that the museum at Warm Springs, the architects, and they're celebrating their 30th year this year, used sort of were influenced by the Tule Mat Lodge, but also to represent all three tribes, kind of an element of a longhouse, so that's something similar to the dance houses you saw, and then also the Paiute have something more like a wickiup or teepee type thing. So they managed to combine all those elements in the museum. And mats, small mats, are made, these two were made, or this grouping was made by Rosie Johnson. They are used as placemats, as handbags, as jewelry, as just about everything you can think of. And they accompany Plateau people throughout their life as tangible markers for rites of passage, often providing a literal foundation for the event itself. And Tule, the plant, is everywhere in the ecosystem and everywhere in the life cycle. They're used as Tule mats are used at baby naming ceremonies, at weddings, at feast, where they serve as tables when they're laid on the floor, at funerals to accompany the body of the deceased. The largest mats are these coverings, and the smallest are used in all kinds of ways, including, remember again, the Sweat Lodge Tule mat that was, or the Sweat Rock Tule mat that were in front. So the original Art of Ceremony exhibit by the Warm Springs was featuring a traditional wedding party. And so that's what you're seeing here with all that spectacular beadwork that I was talking about. But kind of hidden in plain sight is this Tule mat. And so it's right here, this really long, big Tule mat rolled out. In fact, it's so long it couldn't fit. I mean, it was longer than the case. And on it are all of the gifts that the groom and the bride families would be giving to the other side. And so, in a sense, the mat is essential to the ceremony. It's essential to the social dimension of the ceremony. And the bride and groom themselves would step onto a different Tule mat, purpose-made for their wedding ceremony, and when they step, and to have the ceremony, and when they step off of it, they are then in a union, and the marriage is complete. And so without these simple mats, in some way, the ceremonies are compromised, despite the presence of all of this marvelous regalia. By the time that the book rolled around, the desire was to focus more on Tule itself, which again was a really interesting decision to me, and its role as a foundation. So the Tule mat in the exhibit was always there, but hiding in plain sight to the public eye. While the Tule plant itself isn't scarce, it has to be harvested and processed at particular times of year. Rosie Johnson, who has been one of the people with whom I've had a number of conversations and has been hugely helpful to me, is one of the most active Tule gatherers and map makers at Warm Springs. And she likes to gather Tule in midsummer, after the flowers have gone to seed, but before the heat makes them too brittle. And she will come back from a harvesting. These have been laid out to dry, but she'll come back from harvesting with just mountains and mountains of Tule. And I not long ago asked her, could you send me some pictures of Tule that you have? This is what she sent me. So it's like at her office at work in the basement, because there's too much of it. And this is what she was also showing me, some mats she's working on. And so in any case, you know, Rosie is an example of someone who keeps Tule, prepared Tule on hand, so that mats can be made at any time, because you can't always know when a funeral is going to happen, right? You can't always know when a feast may need to be held. And Rosie and others regularly lead Tule gathering trips for youth and are constantly finding ways to introduce the land and the life cycle to new generations. So to sort of close Warm Springs, I think this idea that Thule is everywhere from birth to death is such a simple phrase, but means so much about the presence of the human-plant relationship. Okay, so finally, and I am in my final stretch here. In fact, get a little drink of water. I want to return to Bobby Connor. This is a photo of Bobby that I love. I'm not sure she does, but I love this photo. She was speaking at the Art of Ceremony at Willamette in 2008. And she graciously wrote the afterword for the book. And I want to, talk about what she wrote. I want to share this with you. And I won't read it all to you because I know you can all take a look yourself. But what she said at the beginning, and these are literally her very first words in the afterword, Indigenous people the world over have rarely been given their due by those who colonized us. And in talking about this, she goes on in the afterword to make the point that not having been given their due, Indigenous cultures are not waiting to be validated or corroborated. They've been not given their due and ignored, and worse, for very long. So they're not waiting for their knowledge to be affirmed in a sense. But she says, and she argues, that knowledge is utterly essential and is ignored to the world's peril. So she goes on to write, and yet the lessons learned by generation after generation after generation living in the same region, which I think is so important for non-Indigenous people like myself to try to wrap our minds around about what it means to have your people in a place for 10 or 15,000 years or more. I think as mainstream Americans, that is a very hard thing to conceptualize. We can know it intellectually, but to really understand that. Coexisting to the benefit of more than our own species are pivotal to understanding this world. So these lessons are pivotal to our understanding. So I want to close my formal remarks with Bobby's words and also remember that the ignorance of the non-Indigenous public, myself included, is not accidental, okay? Real understanding of tribal sovereignty, if we really understood it and understood its basis in colonialism and all of the other forces, it would imply real social change, or at least for most moral human beings it would. And there has been progress, usually won through tribal activist efforts like the Tribal History Shared History curriculum, like what U of O is doing with braiding sweetgrass, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. So as I was preparing for this talk, I read and reread this mission or this goal of the McCosh lecture, the trends, theories, and creative practices that shape the artistic culture of our region. And I hope I've conveyed something of theories, right, of practices, and certainly our region and Indigenous thriving and presence in our region, and how this artwork has the potential to teach all of us about deeply rooted Indigenous art histories and contemporary art practice of our place, which are intertwined. It's not these are contemporary practices, and I want to keep stressing that. So I'm hoping really that any artist and those interested in art practicing and learning in our region at the very least become aware of this fabulous body of work, And even though, those who participated in these conversations really want people to appreciate what they do and how they see the world, but they are not waiting for other people to validate them. And I think that's really important. So I look forward to having a conversation with you about your responses to these ideas and these works. And I thank you so much for this invitation and for your time. So I think we have time to take a couple of questions, or comments or sharings, if you have them. Yes.
I've always been curious about one thing that you sort of cleared up by saying this is about contemporary Indigenous.
Right.
But before contemporary, what did they do for plastic beads before plastic? I mean, what was used?
Well, a lot of those are glass beads.
Okay.
So,
I
but,
didn't realize that.
well, there were lots of things serve as beads.
Okay.
So seeds,
All right.
shells, elk teeth, all kinds of things are, beads are, glass beads are but one category
Right.
of beads. So, but, instead of hand grinding a clamshell
Yes.
bead, if you could get a bunch of glass beads from Czechoslovakia, that would be kind of easier or whatever, but yeah.
Well, that's why my question is about, so the things that they create come from the land, this land right here.
Many of, right.
And then to me, I always thought, well, beads are beautiful, and a lot of them are plastic or glass. And in the indigenous cultures that I've been exposed to in Mexico and the United States, there's beadwork is the thing that white people see the most, and it's attractive, it's beautiful.
Yes, often, and that is, I think, in part why both Warm Springs and Umatilla decided to present themselves, not by acknowledging that that they have, that is masterful, but also really focusing on the beauty of the Sweat Lodge rocks and the beauty of things made from tule. But I guess I also want to stress, and I really don't want to put myself in the position of speaking for any of these artists.
Yeah.
That's why I like to quote directly. But I will just say that glass beads are every bit as indigenous now and part of indigenous people's work, as is eBay for, for getting furs of critters that are no longer existing here in Oregon. So, that's a whole conversation, but yes.
I totally respect and thank you for this beautiful lecture of the traditional arts of these different tribes. I'm wondering if there are young people who are also making contemporary work, Native Americans who are making contemporary work to speak beyond their traditional work, their personal lives or feelings or observations, as any of our contemporary artists might do.
Well, you can go right upstairs and see some of that in the Shared Breath exhibit. And, the easy answer is absolutely. I mean, in fact, for people who follow Native arts, contemporary arts are probably what is contemporary fine arts. And these terms are inadequate, right? Because these are, I like to call them customary contemporary arts. But there is an incredible, thriving world, Native American art world out there, both in Canada and the US. There's some work upstairs by Sarah Seastream and others, and there's many young people. Go to the website of the Institute for American Indian Arts in Santa Fe and just scroll through its senior art majors, graduates show, because they're graduating right now, and you can see brilliant work from Native students from all over North America.
I have visited Sands Bay
Uh-huh.
and seen the beautiful contemporary Native American art museum there, which I thought the ideas were just stunning.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, one more. Oh, yeah, Danielle, go ahead.
I just wanted to add on to your question, like Natalie Ball, who's Klamath
Yes.
Modoc, and Black American,
Yeah.
an artist who is trained at the Yale School of Painting and is also, as of last year, elected as a tribal councilwoman.
Right.
Because she had returned to her homelands
Right.
and is raising her children in Chilliwack.
Yeah.
So when you mentioned how
Yeah.
many of these artists are also serving in the capacity of
Mm-hmm.
their tribal government and leadership roles, I immediately thought of her because her work is installation, fabric sculpture, she's done printmaking, and there's an amazing work at the Hallie Museum that I think you acquired early in her
Yeah.
career that's just
Yeah.
outstanding.
Yeah.
A great example, just one example in Oregon of an artist making exactly what you're describing.
Yeah. 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 One more? Yes.
Well, I probably shouldn't bring this up right now. Go ahead. But I am anyway. Maybe a word or two about what's referred to as cultural appropriation
Mm-hmm.
and how ubiquitous it
Mhm.
is, that the
Yeah.
right word it is.
Yeah.
And I don't know what there is to do about it,
Yeah.
but it's so prevalent.
Yeah, it is,
Just a
isn't it?
thought or two
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that issue came up again and again and again in this process. And there is no question that, and we had many conversations. I won't say any of them were heated, but many of them were full of frustration, and I'll give you one example. I was really reluctant. I'll just be really honest, as a non-native person writing about the Sweat Lodge and publishing in a book about the Sweat Lodge. And so for every word in this book has been reviewed by the tribal collaborators. And for that one in particular, I spoke with people as old as in their 90s about that. And the very first thing we talked about when we talked about that was the guy in Arizona, the white guy in Arizona who killed people in his Sweat Lodge. And like he was selling, right? He was appropriating the Sweat Lodge, pretending he was a shaman, all this kind of stuff, and selling this experience, and people died in his Sweat Lodge. And so that's an example of cultural appropriation run really amok, right? And I said, this is often what people have in their minds, and we discuss it in there. It's actually in the book. And what people said was, they're not doing sweat correctly. And what we want to, this is not a how-to. None of this is how-to. None of this is. But what it is trying to communicate the core meanings so that any decent human being might have the respect and potentially rethink. Although I will just say that all of us are very aware that the impulse to appropriate and take and consume seems just baked into the global capitalist system, if I can put it. So there is a risk there. There is absolutely a risk there. And we'll see what happens. But the decision was made by each and every one of these people to go forward. And I have to have a lot of respect for that. So.
And I wasn't even thinking about your work.
Oh.
I was thinking more of the commercialization.
Yeah.
And how prevalent that is.
Right. Well, and I will say there are some laws that protect the identification and making of Native American work in the United States. They're not always working, it's not always effective, but if you are a collector of art and of Native art, it's really, kind of your responsibility to be sure that you are buying, if a person is representing themselves of Native, that they are in fact Native. So, yeah. But it will always be an issue because Americans have a problem. I think it comes from a profound discomfort from the original sin of colonialism and slavery, if you really want to know. I might just leave it on that. Anyway, so thank you.